Over the last two parts, we have discovered that cotton is far more significant than any of us may have realized. Part 1 went pretty heavy into the science. In part 2, we followed its journey from ancient civilizations into the Industrial Revolution, from some of the most incredible innovation in all of history to some of the darkest moments of humanity. Through all of that research, though, one question kept following me around. Why does humanity seem to care so much about this fiber? It's been both a clothing and a commodity. And in this chapter, we're also going to learn that it's been very meaningful. Because the more research I did, the more I saw that cotton wasn't just being woven into garments. It was also being woven into stories, rituals, and religion. And this is going to be where our journey takes a bit of an unexpected turn. Chapter 6, Why Humanity is So Obsessed with It. So if you've made it this far, you have now learned that cotton is strong, cotton is comfortable. We've learned about its role in trade routes, industries, and the economy. But none of these things explain the part that activated all of this research in the first place. Why are humans so obsessed with it? Because apparently it's not just a fiber. Across thousands of years and countless cultures, it's been an integral part of tradition too. It carries ideals of purity, life renewal, and our relationship with the natural world. And when that happens, something interesting seems to occur. The material stops being material. It becomes a symbol. After all, no one's writing creation myths about acrylic. At least I don't think so. So for a little while, I'd like to step away from botany, factories, and spinning cycles, and I want to take a little step into the more human side of it. Why is it that throughout history, people have looked at this little hairy plant seed and thought it represented something a bit more sacred? I found this theme in quite a few religious parts of the internet. One of the earliest and most enduring relationships with cotton can be found in Hinduism. In old Hindu traditions, cotton was far more than something that was simply useful. It actually held a lot of representation. Across Hindu communities, it represented purity, simplicity, and spiritual discipline. For centuries, sacred threads worn during ceremonies were made from traditionally prepared white cotton. The thread itself represented responsibility, new learning, and the next stage of life. It was a physical reminder of a spiritual concept, a spiritual commitment, if you will. But cotton's significance went far beyond spiritual clothing. Simple cotton garments became associated with humility and clarity as well. Rather than a display of wealth and status like, say, silk, for example, they reflected a desire to live with fewer distractions and a closer connection to spiritual practices. And then one of my favorite was the ancient texts referring to weaving as a metaphor for the universe itself. We did go into this quite a bit in my Spooky Scary Knitting Stories episode 2, which I do highly recommend you watch. Because if you've ever spent hours watching fabric grow stitch by stitch, I think you can understand the appeal of threads crossing and patterns emerging and order slowly revealing itself. And in some traditions, the act of weaving became a way of thinking of existence itself. It began to symbolize the passage of time, the unfolding of destiny, like the interconnected nature of life, which in itself is really poetic. Something as ordinary as a thread of cotton could represent the universe holding itself together. I found it in Buddhist traditions as well. You might have heard of Tibetan prayer flags. If not, it may come to mind these little colorful triangular flags that you'd see hung up, sort of blowing in the wind. But I didn't know that these flags are traditionally made from cotton. But more importantly, they were not designed to last. Now, as knitters, that's a slightly alarming concept. We do spend a lot of time trying to stop our textiles from deteriorating. We wash them carefully, we block them lovingly. We're constantly scanning for moths. We may even be lecturing family members on how long it took us to knit that garment and how to take proper care of it. Meanwhile, these little flags are hung outside with the full expectation that the weather is going to destroy them. The sun, wind, and rain slowly strip their colors away and the edges will begin to fray. It's just poetry writing itself. Little by little, the cotton begins to disappear. And that appears to be the point, because the prayers that are said to these little pieces of cloth are slowly unwoven and sent off into the world, which means that perhaps for the first time in textile history, I found a design where unraveling seems to be a part of the process, other than intentional drop stitches, that is. And the more I thought about that, the more I liked it. Because cotton spends most of this video being praised for its durability and its strength. You know, its ability to survive endless washing cycles. And then we find a little tradition where the fiber's eventual disappearance is a part of its whole existence. I wasn't expecting a cotton deep dive to become philosophical, but here we are. You'll also find cotton in the Kathina ceremony, which takes place annually at the end of a rainy season retreat. Members of the community will offer cotton cloths to monks, which they will then use to make robes. And what struck me about this wasn't necessarily the ceremony itself, it was the choice of the material. They didn't come with cashmere. I mean, that would have made sense. Nobody came with jewel-encrusted ceremonial silk either. They just brought cotton, a plant, something that grows from the earth and is useful enough to wear every day. And that is what makes it so meaningful, which is a little theme we're going to start seeing again and again and again. People are really treating cotton as a luxury fiber. It's more like they just discovered they were living alongside it. A lot like nettle, which we're going to get into in autumn because that one's also an interesting deep dive. It was something dependable that showed up when they needed it. So I kept researching and I kept finding the same pattern everywhere. No matter where I looked, in tradition, cotton kept showing up at really important moments in people's lives. We find it at births, in community practices. We even find it at burial ceremonies, which brings us to the ancient civilization of the Andes. Long before the European ships crossed the Atlantic, the people of the Western South America had developed an extraordinary tradition around textiles, and cotton was central to all of it. To the Inca tribes, cotton was considered the finest cloth they had. Creating it used not only exceptional skill, but a lot of time and a lot of labor, kind of similar to linen, if you've watched that deep dive. The very best of the fabrics were reserved for priests, nobility, and for the very important ceremonies. This humble plant started to become a bridge between everyday world and something much larger. Also found it over in the cultures of the Paracas and Moche, where the deceased were often wrapped up in woven cloth, cotton cloth. Very similar to mummies and mummification, except instead of in ribbons, it was more like large sheets. People would dedicate time specifically to creating these cloths. These cloths were made with this purpose in mind only. And they would spend a huge amount of time and effort making them, spinning them, weaving them, and then embroidering on them. Because to them it wasn't really just about preserving or wrapping up their deceased, it was something much deeper than that. It was a way of almost saying goodbye, but also spiritually guiding their loved one into the next realm. These cloths would have prayers and intentions muttered into them, and they believed that these intentions would be carried through into the next chapter. You could almost think of it like a protective cocoon, or you could think of it as like threads of cherished memories. I kept scratching, and I found it in the Baki ceremonies of Laos in parts of Thailand. And this one genuinely made me smile. During the ceremony, white cotton threads are tied around a person's wrist. The thread is meant to represent well-being, protection, luck, and the idea of keeping your soul close. And that made me smile because I think every knitter understands the emotional power of thread and string. I don't know, but I feel like we've all kept a little bit of scrap yarn from that one special project, that one that really held a lot of sentimentality to us. People can be surprisingly dear about fibre. Maybe because thread is one of the simplest ways of representing connection. And for thousands of years, cotton's been helping us do exactly that. And to wrap up this beautifully poetic, philosophical chapter, I found a strange little story in Europe. A considerably strange story, in medieval Europe, that is. About as strange as old European stories can be. So, for most of all of this time, majority of the Northern Europeans had never actually seen cotton before. They'd only heard about it. They've heard that it's this fluffy white little ball that merchants had been bringing from distant lands. And all they had was their imagination to try and figure out where it came from. So a little folklore story began that cotton grew from a remarkable plant. And instead of producing fruit or vegetables, this plant produced little baby lambs. According to the legend, each lamb remained attached to the plant, kind of like, the ends of the leaf. And it could only graze on the grass around it that it could reach, until no more grass remained. They referred to this as the vegetable lamb of Tartary, half plant and half sheep. And fortunately or unfortunately for knitters, don't know where you are on that, it's completely fictional. I love this story because it shows how people explained an unfamiliar fibre long before they had the ability to really understand it. They were faced with something soft, white and woolly, and they invented a plant that grew sheep. And if a cotton lamb sounds strange to you, wait until you hear about the theories that come next. Chapter 7, The Tinfoil Hat Perspective. We're finally entering my favorite territory. So far throughout these videos, we've remained relatively sensible. But every now and again, when you're doing your research, you accidentally open a door that most probably was closed for a reason. And behind that door are people wearing their tinfoil hats. Now, before we continue, I should probably clarify something. Everything in this chapter belongs firmly in the world of theories, alternative theories. Speculative interpretations, folklore, esoteric traditions, and basically ideas that exist well outside of historic or scientific mainstream consensus. In other words, we're leaving the museum now, kids. We are leaving the university. We are leaving the peer-reviewed journals. And we are heading directly into the weird section of the gift shop. Because if you spend enough time digging around on the internet in textile history, something unexpected happens. Cotton stops being a plant, and suddenly it becomes an energetic conductor, a spiritual amplifier, a cosmic receiver, even a protective barrier against invisible forces. Depending on which rabbit hole you're falling down this week, cotton is either helping you communicate with higher dimensions or protecting you against them. And after spending days researching cotton, I couldn't possibly leave this part out because it tells us something fascinating about humans. Give us enough time and we can turn absolutely anything into a mystery, even a fluffy little hairseed. So, in the spirit of curiosity, mild concern, and increasingly questionable state of my search history, which I now probably need to delete, let's all put on our tinfoil hats and see what happens when cotton leaves the world of textiles and enters the world of wonderfully strange and speculative ideas. One of the first theories I encountered was so strange, I immediately typed it out because I knew if I didn't, I would regret it. According to some alternative energy research, cotton's famous 100 Hertz frequency isn't actually a benefit at all. In fact, some argue it's the complete opposite. Now, if you've never heard anyone assign a frequency to a jumper before, welcome to the weird part of the internet. Please keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times. The theory goes something like this. Cotton sits at roughly the same energetic field as a human body. Not roughly, apparently identical, like exactly. But for this argument, we're referring quite specifically to 100% organic cotton, and it has to be undyed. According to this perspective, comfort is the problem. Cotton doesn't elevate your energy or transform your consciousness. It's not helping you ascend to higher dimensions. Instead, allegedly, it keeps you exactly where you are. Balanced, stable, and comfortable. Suspiciously comfortable. The argument is that cotton acts almost like a spiritual armchair. Very pleasant, very familiar. And because no conspiracy theory ever stops at the sensible place, it goes on. Some proponents suggest that cotton's global popularity isn't accidental. After all, if a fiber really kept people calm, grounded, and comfortable, and energetically predictable, wouldn't powerful institutions everywhere want everyone wearing it? At this point in my research, I had to put my laptop down and go for a walk because somehow we were traveling from a soft plant fiber to global consciousness management strategy in under 3 paragraphs, which honestly is impressive. Of course, I do need to stress that there's no real scientific theories supporting any of these claims. Oh, but I do find them fascinating. Because they reveal something about the way people think. For most people, cotton is going to be explained in affordability, durability, comfort, and the fact that it grows in a field. For others, it's explained by vibrational frequencies, spiritual evolution, and other such topics. And if you're wondering if the theories get stranger from here, oh, they absolutely do. Just when I thought this couldn't get any weirder, I discovered that cotton, our hero, has a nemesis. We're talking Disney villain, and its name, polyester. Now in knitting circles, this is kind of not really news. People have been arguing about natural fibers versus synthetic fibers for a very long time, usually over cups of tea. Occasionally with surprising levels of passion. But the tinfoil hat theory takes it to a whole new level. According to some alternative theories, the modern world's love affair with synthetic fabrics isn't an accident. It's not about cost or durability, or even mass production. Oh no, that would be too straightforward. Instead, we are told polyester, synthetic fabrics like nylon and acrylic may be interfering with the body's natural energy system. And once again, I just want to remind everyone that we're not in the science section of the library anymore. We're behind the building, following a man who's got a folder telling us he has some evidence. And according to his theories, Synthetic fibers vibrate at a dramatically lower frequency to natural ones. Cotton, wool, silk, linen are often described as energetically supportive. Polyester, on the other hand, well, that's the villain of the story, the dark lord of the laundry basket. The theory suggests that surrounding your body with synthetic fibers creates a kind of energetic interference. Some descriptions compare it to static. Others describe it as a barrier. I'm starting to think this might belong in my spooky, scary knitting stories. Maybe it'll make its way in there. They describe it like a synthetic fog that disturbs your connection to the electromagnetic frequency force field of Earth. And if you've been wondering if maybe people are blaming leggings for Earth's problems, the answer is yes, apparently. At this point, I started reading claims that modern clothing was responsible for fatigue, brain fog, emotional imbalance, spiritual disconnection, and a variety of other ailments, which is quite a lot of responsibility to place on my yoga pants, already when they've survived leg day. But what's really fascinating is this true? Is it not? It's more like how quickly we turned these ordinary objects into characters. Suddenly, cotton is this wise old guardian of the natural energy world, and polyester is the corporate villain. And then an innocent trip to buy sportswear starts sounding like opening a chapter of a fantasy novel. Although I will admit, if someone ever writes The Fellowship of the Natural Fibres, I will absolutely read that book. Now, every good conspiracy theory eventually arrives at a point where people start talking about machines. And sure enough, cotton's conspiracy lore does not disappoint. Up until now, we've been talking about frequencies, vibrations, energy fields, the kind of thing that's really hard for me to explain to my husband when we go out on a date. But then I kept seeing a reference to a particular study of a particular piece of equipment, and suddenly the story took a sharp and mysterious turn, kind of like a mystery novel. According to various websites, discussions, forum posts, and corners of the internet, which become progressively harder to leave once you enter them, the famous measurements often referred to as fabric frequency charts weren't actually using hertz when they recorded them at all. Instead, they are supposedly produced using something called an agviron machine, which, it sounds like it's in Antarctica or under a volcano. I had questions. What is an agviron machine? Who built it? How does it work? Why does every question produce 3 extra questions? Well, this theory suggests that this machine measured energetic wavelengths using a different system altogether. And according to researchers in these communities, that's where the real story begins. Because although there are conspiracy theories, there's always some receipts. The claim is that information on this machine became very difficult to find. References disappeared. Documents, very scarce. Original sources, almost impossible to find. And before long, this theory transformed into a discussion. And my fellow fibre nerds who enjoy a little tinfoil went into full mystery busting mode. They went looking for the lost data. They went searching for that hidden technology. And they discovered that possibly someone, some way, didn't actually want this information to be found. Your girl, she's been asking too many questions. Again. Now, if you've been paying attention, you may have noticed we've traveled very far away from a little plant growing in a seed. That ambitious little plant cell? A very long way indeed. We started with cotton fibers. We've moved through humanity into spirituality, and now we're wandering through frequencies. We're investigating a case of a very mysterious machine. And if someone put violence to this and I sat down and told you it was a Netflix documentary, I think you'd listen. Because I've already been quite convinced for quite some time that there may be a little bit of secret fabric energy hidden inside humanity. Because humanity and their relationship with fabric frequencies has been going on for a really long time. A really long time. Again, did anyone watch my linen deep dive? I mean, is cotton secretly powering the universe? We are storytelling creatures, let's just be honest. You give us fiber, you give us data, you give us a machine with a very mysterious name, and pretty soon, we're going to give you back some kind of law. And then I found one of my favorite theories in this whole rabbit hole, because apparently for some people, the story doesn't stop at frequencies. It doesn't stop at mysterious machines or even synthetic fabric. Oh no. The next step is mixing fibers. According to some alternative interpretations, there are certain ancient traditions that discourage mixing certain fibers. And if you know anything about me, and if you've been here a minute, you may know I find this theory very, very fascinating. This is the point where my inner historian, she's leaving the room, and my inner storyteller, she's got her bucket of popcorn and she's sat. The theory proposes that every material carries its own energetic signature. Cotton has one, wool has another, and linen has another one. And when certain fibers are combined, allegedly, it creates a kind of an energetic interference that can, in some cases, be described as opening portals. Just think about it like taking two pebbles and you drop one in the pond and you drop the other in the pond, and then you watch those ripples like interact with each other. Except in this story, the pond is your aura. As this theory evolves, the language gets increasingly more dramatic. What starts as a discussion about incompatible fibers starts to become warnings about disruptive energy fields, weakened spiritual boundaries, and becoming vulnerable to outside influence. Some versions describe this as an energetic shortcut. Others describe it as a static drowning out of radio signals. And other interesting corners of the internet suggest that wrong fibers could interfere with your natural connection to the spiritual world altogether, which is a lot of responsibility to put on my cardigan. However, sometimes these impractical and very spiritual conversations, I feel like they are quite important. And there's something wonderfully strange about the way these stories keep surviving. And you know what? As explanations go, your sweater accidentally collapsed your aura field. Well, I might keep that one in my back pocket.